Hello.
Whoa.
Whoa, whoa.
This is Alpha Love.
This is Nick. Joy. We're here at Giftival, Brazil, Santos. Gift culture.
It sounds like life.
Yeah, there's something about that that drops me into this deeper space. Yeah, there's this widening, like this energy of widening. Offers a playful glee as a magic.
For me, it's like it's something that calls us forth to be more present. It's like for me, I think that's the root of gift is deep presence. It's a place where that magic emits from.
Yeah. And also a gentleness, like threads of empathy flowing in. Kind of connecting our hearts, flowing down the stairway here into the rooms.
The magic of gift spreading everywhere. It's cultivating the energy through the whole space and recognizing that it's always been there.
Yeah, it's just like this subtle energetic field, and some of our concepts are ownership and exchange, that they can kind of constrict these subtle energetic flows. And you never know where it's like things that need to happen that's connecting and weaving, and allowing that to flow kind of opens us to those connections that happen all over Earth through reality.
Just choosing to pay attention to that again.
It's like the sounds of nature, and letting that enter into us. And the more we are receptive, the more of something or that not something kind of begins to happen.
Experience takes on a different quality.
Yeah. You know, on the path to kind of more spiritual enlightenment, like there's practices, individual practices, yoga, meditation. But there's also important practices that weave the we, because if we are part of the oneness, then how we connect is really important. And economics and politics too is like part of that way of connecting. And
so deeply so, yeah. And the way that they're happening are with some of those former contracting elements that you spoke to a minute ago. Those senses of separation or of ownership or possession, and kind of permeate those spaces, these domains that are meant to be about relationship and quality of relationship. Politics, how do we collectively decision make ultimately, right? In the economy, how do we collectively exchange?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think these practices like gift economy is actually a spiritual practice of how to we. And I think in terms of politics, the more we can do power with rather than power over, more these non-hierarchical collective structures that really are listening to and learning to listen to how we work together, but without necessarily requiring someone over telling and coordinating everything. And that requires listening and empathy and practices of conflict transformation, of counsel, and I think it requires facilitators, talented facilitators who are really able to hold space can really help a community come together. And I think in this new economy, this new gift culture, facilitators will become more of an important role that comes to the forefront.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the questions right now, right? if we're looking at alternative ways, more open ways, more emergent and intuitive, natural ways of coexisting, co-creating, co-exchanging, it needs to be held by the folks who have made a dedication to paying greater attention, to being more present, to being more aware. And I feel like that's kind of the toolkit that a facilitator signs on for. Is I'm going to be here in this space, be at peace within myself, and paying attention to what's arising around me, and not trying to, we spoke to rescuing in another conversation just before this, not having that be the impulse that comes through, by really being at peace. So it's not about diverting the energy or controlling the energy in any way, but just being present to the energy that's arising and helping it come into greater coherence. There's like smoothing the path, and then there's like diversion, which is like, oh, I don't want to look at that, so I'm going to go over here now. And that learning to just smooth the path so that whatever it is that we're coming to, whatever obstacle or challenge that's on the road, we move through it rather than avoiding it.
Yeah, allowing that energy to be alive without jailing it.
Yeah. And jailing's the contraction again there, right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Alpha. Is there something you'd like to ask me in the form of this dialogue? This moment of connection and conversation.
What is activating you now in your life?
So I've been getting really excited about the emerging conversation of dynamic steering, because I think it helps bring a deeper understanding into an alternative way to move through life. So what's activating me is a growing awareness that if I say my life is to do this specific thing, in fact, I'm limiting myself. Whereas if I'm putting forward an intention of where it is that I'm going, I'm able to make adjustments based on what's happening, based on what I'm reading in that field that I'm walking through. So when you ask me what activates me, there's that primary intention that's always there that we were tasting just a moment ago. And then at some point that starts to take on momentary pursuits or momentary projects. And so I would say that right now some of the projects that I'm most focused on are working with the current economic system to unlock abundance through relationship. So what I mean by that is there's so many people out there who have so much more money than they have practical use for. And the traditional story, the current mainstream story about what to do in that position is to just make that number grow. So then we see the emergence of something like philanthropy, where it's more like a recognition that I have more than I need, but I'm also gonna be giving that away, but I'm not necessarily initiated into gift culture. So what does that gift or that giving actually look like, and how much control or ownership am I still trying to maintain? So I've been getting really interested in working with people who do live in a state of economic abundance to build a personal relationship and explore the difficulty that I imagine that pressure creates in people as well. There's kind of these worlds of privilege that create isolation at a certain point, where it's like people become unsure about how they should be in the world with all of this privilege. And so there's like a fear and a contraction that arises in some of the least likely of places. As a non-economically abundant individual, without millions and millions of dollars, I think the traditional story would be, oh, they have it so easy, and there's this disconnect and this lack of compassion for the difficult situation that they're in, because they're walking through a world where they're looking at everyone else and thinking, should I be helping more? How am I showing up to that? And also, a lot of times coming from contexts or families where the story that they're told is, no, you should be looking out for you. This is your gift. This is something for you. And so to kind of deconstruct that mentality while also flowing another form of abundance to the community of, maybe it's the community of facilitators who can come in and be in relationship with people that are longing for a deeper meaning in their lives. And then when we start to find these mutually beneficial relationships, for me that's a big part of gift culture, is how do we create win-win situations, and not because I'm expecting something in return, but just because we live in a field of such abundance that there's no reason it has to be either or all the time. It can be both and.
Yeah.
And as we tune into that energy, it becomes that.
It seems like some of these people with more modern terms of definitions of economic wealth, in the modern definition of privilege, which may not be the indigenous way you might define privilege, like sometimes they've been disconnected from the community, and they've been disconnected from the flow, the vibrant, alive flow. So it sounds cool. You've chosen to work with this group, of privileged people. That how to bring them back into that organic, alive flow, and they themselves will feel more part of the whole and more truly enriched, as opposed to more kind of under this modern definition of richness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm feeling particularly called to that in this time, because we undoubtedly live in a paradigm where there's a lot of existential fear about economic success and abundance. And I think that's what most keeps people away from stepping into gift culture, and also is one of the things that allows the continued status quo to keep moving, because it's just financially more resource, and with those finances that currently means you can have access to any natural resource, any tangible thing you can basically acquire with money. So in seeing the emergence of a new paradigm and the death of an old world, for me the big transitional gap is related to economics and related to the flow of money. And so how do we use this current system and the current wealth that is out there and the way that we perceive that, and rather than standing morally opposed to that and rejecting money, like I think there's been a long tradition of new paradigm thinkers or spiritually enlightened who kind of want to absolve their earthly attachments, especially to things like money, and to instead embrace that and look at how is this system currently structured, and how can I actually leverage that to allow the new paradigm to rise. So how do I kind of use the blood energy, the green energy, the extractive energy of money, and use that as a healing force to smooth the path for the rise of global networks that allow for a new paradigm, that allow for whole people to live in whole community on this one earth.
Cool. And you also brought up that you're trying to work with communities of facilitators. What are you doing with communities of facilitators?
Yeah, so I've been really focused on the intentional communities world for probably about the last 5 years. I feel like they're this really powerful hotbed of whole systems design. So when I first found the word eco-village, one of the things that really called me into that world was that they weren't just thinking about sustainability as an environmental thing. They were thinking about it also as an economic and a social thing, which isn't so new yet. You know, there's been the sustainability triangle for a while, but they also talk about the culture and or you could also call that the worldview piece of sustainability. So for me, they're like these laboratories of people who have made a conscious choice to step into a whole systems experiment and live in it every day. And so for me, in terms of these 4 dimensions of sustainability, the one that's really interesting and I think pivotal to our time, transitioning from a culture of separation to a culture of community, is these social technologies. And for me, that's a large piece of the facilitator's role. And that's the place where I see intentional communities pushing the edge just about more than anyone. It's one thing to collaborate in a workspace, which is beautiful and wonderful, but then imagine also living with all of those people that you're working with. Yeah. So this comes into very immediate territory in my personal life, because my life's partner, my lover, is also who I've chosen to have my most productive working relationship with. And we're both basically self-employed and working and generating our own projects as a duo. And so suddenly this paradigm of like living in community becomes a very real thing, and almost like an amplified thing through that specific form of a primary partnership, because then it's one person and one person, and some of the facilitation that happens, or just there's alternative voices in a community, and so that helps a lot, and sometimes those voices are more trained. I might call those facilitators. But in a one-to-one relationship, there's no external reference point. And so for me, that's like the even more amplified challenge of how can you and I be together and not be triggered, or if we are triggered, to actually come back to the table with a full willingness to own our own wounds and our own pain and come to peace with that, so that when we're looking at each other and working with each other, the projections are able to be processed by either, your feedback to me or my own willingness to look at myself. And with that feedback, also the openness to receive it, so that I do look at myself if I'm needing that support from you. And so I think to do that in this primary partnership way and find a positive path forward is about as socially intimate and like intense of an incubator that we can step into. So I find myself really attracted to both intentional communities and the sorts of relationships where it's multifaceted and very, very consistent, So
Yeah.
I want to work with you and I want to live with you.
Yeah, I think it's very powerful, this whole idea of whole systems design for gift culture, and also this personal relationship and that intimacy, like that comes into a very deep, relationship with gift culture. And and that for me, that's a very personal excitement too. And I'm interested in designing some of these systems that we have, some of these social, cultural systems, so that they're more alive and dynamic. And just to share 2 of those that I've been kind of working on. One is the gift circle process, where people sit in circle, and then each person in turn will share their needs. And as they share their need, which maybe I need some editing help, or I need babysitting help, or I need dog walking help, someone else in the circle can share that they can help with that. And they gift their help as not as a barter and not as money, but as a gift. And that gifting, if this circle meets regularly, this gifting starts to build community, and that community generates more gifting. So this is one kind of living system structure that worked and now has proliferated around the world. And the second one is this facilitated improv. And I was just talking earlier, and you too, about the importance of facilitation to gifting. Like the facilitator is weaving the whole fabric upon which the gifting happens. And the facilitated improv is a process where you sit in circle and people go into meditation until someone gets a hit of a process to lead, which might be, like a stretch, or to share, something that happened that was powerful for you yesterday. So each person is invited, if they feel called, to facilitate the group for a minute or 5 minutes, and then they go back into silence until someone else gets a hit. So that group is self-facilitating. It's like there's no one above that's saying what should happen. It's a very powerful process. You're like co-piloting the space. Yeah. And even in, it can be done in a 2-person, relationship. Like you can do this facilitating process. And I think this process teaches us how we're co-navigating the space and how to go deeper. And in that deeper space is where more magic and more gifting happens. And also I think it's teaching us how to become facilitators. This process is like a way of people who aren't very good at facilitating come in and they actually accord to facilitate, and they maybe facilitate a 1 minute thing or 5 minute thing and slowly become more comfortable. And I think in that we can generate a plethora of facilitators around the world, which I think is really essential to birthing this gift culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's making me think of one of the practices that I've become most excited about recently. I was introduced to it in a format called Avalon, but essentially what the invitation is it's having a small group of people for about a week, and I'm experimenting with how to do this on a much shorter timeline, but essentially what's created is a space where there's an explicit agreement to both follow your own intuitive nature. So if that means that in this moment I feel called to put my arm up here, then that's what I do, and that's explicit. So I also know that that's what you're doing. And then that there's also an agreement that you and each person are responsible for their own boundaries. So if I do this because that's what my nature is telling me to do, and that is unwanted, that you can express that freely without hurting me or without having to be afraid of that. And so what it creates is this dynamic space in which I feel free to express myself and trust fully that the other people in that space are expressing themselves. And then what happens is the actual organic flow of what we were talking about before, kind of this energy that imbues and imbibes everything that lives and that is.
So you're bringing the body into this whole connection.
Yeah, and bringing the body awareness, for sure. Yeah, so the awareness of the impulses in the body, and then allowing that to become the place from which I navigate to exactly where I need to be without thinking about it or creating some story about, oh, I want to go talk to Alpha now. Well, I either end up next to you because I'm following my body's intuition, or I don't. And then that whole potentiality for the concept to block what my embodied wisdom actually tells me is off the table. And it's also really effective for healing like pre-cognitive or pre-verbal trauma. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Alpha.